Kitab'ul-Kafi, Volume 2 of 8. This will be a rough reading because of the length of the material. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Part 1. The Book of Belief and Disbelief. Chapter 1. The clay from which the believers and unbelievers are made. H 1438, Chapter 1a, H1. Ali ibn Ibrahim has narrated from his father, from Hamad ibn Isa, from Ribi'in Abdullah, from a man from Ali ibn al-Hussein, recipient of Divine Supreme Covenant, who has said the following: Allah, the Majestic, the Glorious, created the prophets from the clay of Ilion, paradise, both their bodies and souls. He made the hearts of the believers from such clay, and he made their bodies from a world lower than that world. He created the unbelievers. He created the unbelievers, both their bodies and souls from the clay of scission, fire. He thus mixed the two clays. For this reason, children of unbelievers become believers, and vice versa. For this reason, the believers get afflicted with evil and unbelievers receive good things. Thus, the hearts of the believers incline to that from which they are created, and the hearts of the unbelievers incline to that from which they are created. Allah, the Majestic, the Glorious, created the believers from the clay of paradise. He created the unbelievers from the clay of fire. He then said, when Allah, the Majestic, the Glorious, decides to grant good to one of his servants, he purifies his spirit and body. Whenever he hears any good thing, he recognizes it. Whenever he hears any bad thing, he dislikes them. I, the narrator, then heard him saying, quote, the clays are of three kinds. A. One is the clay of the prophets, from which the believers are also created, except that the prophets are made of the superior kind of clay. The prophets are the roots, and the believers are the branches, and for this reason they are more excellent than the believers. The believers are created from a stickier kind of clay. Thus Allah, the Majestic, the Glorious, will not keep them apart from their followers. The Imam then said, the clay of those who insult are from a black clay that smells foul. The weak ones are made from soil. The believers do not change their faith, nor do evildoers, those who insult, recipients of Divine Supreme Covenant. Do so, and Allah has a definite goal behind it. H 1440, Chapter 1a, H3. May Allah keep my soul of service to you. From what kind of material has Allah, the Majestic, the Glorious, created the clay of the believers? He then replied, he has created them with the clay from which the prophets were made. Thus they never became unclean. Hadith 1441, Chapter 1a, Hadith 4. I heard Abu Ja'far, recipient of Divine Supreme Covenant, saying, Allah, the Majestic, the Glorious, created us from the topmost of paradise. He made the hearts of our followers from that which he had created us. He created their bodies from that which is below. Thus their hearts incline to us, They are made from what He has made us. He then recited this verse of the Holy Quran. However, the records of the deeds of the virtuous ones will certainly be in Ilion. Would that you had known what Ilion is. It is a comprehensively written book of records. The ones nearest to Allah will bring it to the public. He then said, Allah has created our enemies from scission, and He has created the hearts of their followers from what He has created them. He created the bodies of their followers of our enemies, from other matters. Thus their hearts, the hearts of the followers of our enemies, incline to them, to our enemies, because they are created from what they, our enemies, are created. Then he recited this verse of the Holy Quran. Let them know that the records of the sinner's deeds are incision. Would that you had known what scission is. It is a comprehensively written book of records. Woe on that day to those who have rejected Allah's revelations, and those who have rejected the day of judgment. Hadith 1442, Chapter 1a, Hadith 5. Once I said to the Imam, May Allah keep my soul in service for your cause. I am your servant, Abu Abdullah ibn Kaysan. The Imam said, I know your genealogy, however, I did not know you. I said, I was born in the mountains and grew up in the land of Persia. I associate with people in business and other occasions. I, thus, associate with a man and find his appearance very good, to be of good manners and more trustworthy. When I investigate, I find him to be one of your enemies. I also associate with another man who has bad manners, is less trustworthy, and hot-tempered. I then investigate and find him to be of your supporters and followers. Why is it so? He, the Imam, said, O Ibn Kaysan, Allah, the Majestic, the Glorious, took a clay from paradise and also from fire, and then mixed them together. Then He separated this from that, and that from this. The good appearances, good manners, and trustworthiness that you find in them, our enemies, is because of the touch of the clay from paradise, but they will return to that from which they are made. The deceitfulness, bad manners, and hot temperament that you find in them, our supporters and followers, is because of the touch of the clay from fire. However, they will return to that from which they were made. Hadith 1443, Chapter 1a, Hadith 6. I asked Abu Abdullah, Are the believers made from the clay from which the prophets were made? He said, Yes, that is correct. H. 1444, Chapter 1a, H7. When Allah, the Majestic, the Glorious, willed to create Adam, He sent Jibreel in the first hours of the Friday. He picked up with his right hand a handful. His hand had in its reach from the seventh heavens to the heaven above earth. From each of the heavens he picked up a handful. He also picked up another handful from the seventh earth of the abovemost, and to the farthest seventh earth. Allah, the Majestic, the Glorious, then commanded his word to hold the first handful in his right, and the other in his left. The clay then was cleaved into two. It was scattered from earth and from the heavens, and then said to the clay in his right hand, From you will be the messengers, the prophets, their successors, the truthful ones, the believers, those who will achieve salvation, and those whom I will to have honors. It then became necessary for them to be as he said them to be. He then said to that which was on his left, From you will be the tyrants, the polytheists, the unbelievers, the devils, and those whom I will to humiliate and be of the wicked ones. It then became necessary for them to become what he said them to become. Thereafter, the two clays mixed together as Allah, the Majestic, the Glorious, has said. Allah makes the seed and the nuts to cleave apart. Quran 695. The seed is the clay of the believers upon which Allah has placed His love. The nuts are the clay of the unbelievers that are far from all good. It is called nuts and nawa because it is far away from all good and from Him. Allah, the Majestic, the Glorious, has said, He, Allah, brings forth the living from the dead and the dead from the living. Quran 695. The living are the believers who come out from the unbelievers, and the dead who come out of the living are the unbelievers who are from the believers. The living are the believers, and the dead are the unbelievers. This is because of the words of Allah. Are those whom we brought to life after their being dead? 6:122. Their death was the mixing of their clay with the clay of the unbelievers, and His coming to life was when Allah, the Majestic, the Glorious, caused separation between them through His word. In this way, Allah, the Majestic, the Glorious, takes the believers at birth out to light from darkness after their entering therein, and He takes the unbelievers out of the light to darkness after their entering into the light, as it is said in the words of Allah, the Majestic, the Glorious, so that He can give warning to those who are of the living, and the word about the unbelievers truly come to pass. Quran 36:70. End of chapter 1a.